break for lunch in just a few minutes. I was asked to speak in this session on raising godly sons or raising godly boys. Obviously, we could go 1,000 different directions with that, and whether you have sons or not, you don't need me to tell you that they are living in a culture that if you're trying to raise a Christian, godly young men, does not like them, does not like what you are trying to do, and is doing everything possible to undermine, to destroy, whatever, the foundation that you're trying to put in their lives. I've mentioned several times, and I'm sure Leah has as well, our kids, our daughter's 17, our son is 16. We're in that period of time where he's got his permit, which is why my knuckles are so white all the time, because we're having to ride, for hours and hours and hours and hours with him in the car. 60 hours of driving you've got to get your license. Remember these days? When I got my permit, it was like, yeah, drive for a few weeks, come back in. For one thing, I was raised in Missouri. They were just like, you're going to die anyway, so just get your license and die. But I can't remember how much we had to drive. It was almost none, and now it's 60 hours. But what I figured out is, you got a hostage with you. You can talk for a while. You can actually, once you get past the please don't run into that tractor, and actually get on the road a little bit, you can talk a little bit, and hopefully he'll look back on these times as times where we had a lot of fun, listened to songs on the radio and stuff, but also had some good conversations. Some of them fun, but some of them about some more serious things. One of the things, and you know this, but I still want to say it just to put it out there, kind of lay the foundation. One of the things that makes this so important about raising godly sons who will become men is that if we don't, the church and the nation will fall apart. God has put in place in the church male leadership. So if we are not raising the next generation of those leaders, God's church is going to continue, obviously. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. But as far as, in a particular location or the strength of a congregation in a particular location, it will fall apart if you don't have those godly men. A nation will fall apart. I'm not saying women can't be politicians. That's not what I mean. But the fabric of a nation will fall apart if you don't have men who have godly morals upholding that. It just will not. I'm a nerd. I majored in history in college. Okay, that's why I'm so boring. That's why I tell people. But you read history at all, and that thread goes through and through and through. The fall of empires, nations, etc., is not just a failure of leadership, quote unquote, but really a failure of moral men. When the Roman Empire, some of you may have heard of Edward Gibbon's book, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. It's massive. I've never read it. I listened to it because it's like 6 volumes. I read a lot, but that's a little bit obscene to read something that long. But he talks about what caused the Roman Empire to fall. And of course, some of them are things you learn in your history books. Obviously they lost some battles, external forces, etc. But one of the things that people don't like to talk about, that he comes back to over and over and over and over again in those volumes, is one of the things that caused the Roman Empire to fall was what he termed internal rottenness. And he meant morality. And he specifically, from time to time, mentioned not just emperors or things, but just the men. The leading men in general just lost morals completely. And so that was one of the things that he said caused the fall. If you don't have men with godly morals, communities crumble. Because who's holding that fabric together? Oh, thank you. I was like, would you like to speak now? Thank you very much. And so what we're talking about, yes, is important for our sons, and that's what we're going to focus on. But if they're going to be people of influence, it's going to influence families, nations, congregations, communities, everything. And so that's what I spend most of our time doing in this session is thinking about some things that we need to save our sons from. In other words, some things that we need to make sure they're avoiding or helping them to think through. And then in a few minutes when we close, I want us to think about what we're helping them to do. In other words, give them something to put out there. It's not just running from something. But there are some things, and we can make a list a mile long. I don't want to do that this morning. But I want to think about 3 things for most of our time that we need to do our best to help our sons avoid or think through or work through that our culture wants to completely just undermine. Number 1, we need to help them to avoid arrogance. Arrogance. Now, we talked last night for a few minutes in one of the lessons about how there's a difference in confidence and arrogance. Confidence is a good thing if it's channeled in the right direction. Arrogance is not a good thing. Pride is a bad thing. The Bible talks about that constantly. But the little boy that shows off all the time, that's kind of natural. It shows off when they're a tween or a teen. That can be kind of natural. But if it's left unchecked and they become an arrogant man, that's a problem. And think about how the culture around us, and again, I've said this 100 times this weekend already. I'll say it again a few more times probably. I know I'm painting with a broad brush, okay? But just in general, if you think about the culture, the larger culture around us, how a man is defined is basically by things of arrogance, right? Things of pride, their latest purchase, what they own, what they can show off, their latest sexual conquests. Have they risen up the corporate ladder? Those types of things. In other words, the world wants to tell our sons, really almost no matter their age, but for sure once they get to the tween and teen years, they want to tell our sons that the first person you think about is you. Yeah. Your 3 favorite words had better be I, me, and my. And mine and myself need to follow really close behind. And so then the more you promote yourself, the better. That's the mindset they're being fed. And we fail our young men, our sons, when we do things that just feed into that. Or when we fail to discipline, when we don't discipline our sons for interrupting, for example. That may seem like a tiny thing, but it is not a tiny thing. Because if they believe that I'm having a conversation right here, but they can break any time, then who's the most important person in the room? They are. No, this person I'm talking to right now is the important one. Not that my son's not important, but they need to realize the world does not revolve around them. They need to realize that the axis of the earth does not run through their backbone. Okay? In other words, the world doesn't revolve. I know we're close to lunch. We're tired, right? They need to realize that the sun doesn't come up just because they got out of bed. That everything is not about them. Think about how many families, and if you do this, I apologize. Again, I'm not trying to take shots. I'm trying just to deal in generalities here. But think about how many families define themselves by the activities of their kids. We had a family one time who began coming to church where I was preaching at the time and started visiting with this really neat family. Loved them a lot. The first conversation I ever had, I didn't even know their names yet except they had just introduced themselves. The first thing they told me was, you probably won't see us much because we're a baseball family. I didn't even know what they meant at first. I didn't know if they meant the dad, maybe like semi-pro baseball. No, their son played Little League baseball. And they defined themselves on his activity. Well, guess who was the center of that family? If the whole family was defined by, we are his activity. I'm not saying don't play baseball. That's cool. That's neat. But that's not the definition of a family. If we're going to be a Christian family, that's what should define us. And we let our kids, our sons especially, think that everything is around them. We're actually going against what the Bible teaches us. Just think of this passage, Philippians 2, 3, and 4. I know the context is dealing with Christians, but the principle is still there. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit. Right? But in humility, count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only out for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. One reason I love that passage from Philippians 2 is that Paul does not say, don't have interests. He says, look out for your own interests, that's okay, but also for the interests of others. This is not all about you. And that's a beautiful balance to teach our sons. It is fine and cool and a good thing to have interests. Fishing or sports, or maybe they enjoy, reading certain things. That's great. But if somebody else has different interests, you treat that person just as kindly. You learn something about what they enjoy, and you listen when they talk about their interests, and you serve them as much as you possibly can. Here's some things that we can do to try to instill this in our sons. Number one, the way I worded this in my notes was, check the self-promotion at the Insta door. In other words, life is not all about me sharing my accomplishments with everybody else. And our sons need to know that. Look, it's a neat thing when you come into a church building on a Wednesday night or something, and there's an older gentleman sitting right here, and some little boy walks up and says, hey, Mr. Johnson, we won our game last night. Great, that's cool, right? That's neat. That's fine to share that, hey, we won something. I got a trophy. That's great. But if that's all our sons are ever talking about, that's a dangerous thing, is what I did, what I accomplished. The Bible tells us, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 17. When's the last time we helped our sons say something good for God instead of just about themselves? 2, build a servant's heart. Of course, you go to John 13, Jesus washing the apostles' feet as kind of the ultimate account of that. But whatever we can do to give our sons opportunities to serve other people, and to do it not for money or not so they can put pictures of it on social media, look what I did, but you're just going to help that widow. Or like the preacher just dropped his pen. Why don't you be, last Sunday morning, I didn't preach at Central, I led singing at Central. And I sat down from leading singing, our youth minister got to preach, and the piece of paper I had my song list on fell off the seat. I didn't see where it went. I thought maybe it literally had vanished. I thought I'd seen a miracle. I literally just went like, and was gone. And I'm sitting there going, okay, I think I remember the invitation song and the closing song. One of our girls sitting on the other side of the auditorium, not our girls as in mine, just one of the girls in the youth group, saw where it went, got up while the preacher was preaching, picked it up, handed it to me. I thought, that girl understands what it means to have a servant's heart. She saw someone in a situation that they couldn't figure out, and I'm going to take care of it. We teach our sons the same thing. Teach them to celebrate other people and not just themselves. Trash talk, it's part of being a boy. I get it. I do it too, right? We have text message threads with friends and with family about sports teams or whatever, and we trash talk to some degree or whatever. That's fine. I'm not saying never do that. But don't get so into that we forget to teach our sons to actually be happy for other people too. To celebrate when they win something or they get something or they're honored in some way. And it's a muscle that we need to build is making sure that they learn to celebrate when other people, the Bible teaches us to do that. Not just weep with those who weep. What's the other part of that verse? Rejoice with those who rejoice. I'll be honest with you, that's the harder one for most people, I think. Because if I see someone crying, they lost a loved one or whatever, I may not literally weep, but I feel with them, right? I may literally weep, but even if I don't, they can see in my face or my words or whatever that, man, I hurt. But when they got the promotion I wanted, and they're really, really happy, that's a whole lot harder command to follow. But it starts when we're raising boys who their friend won the baseball championship. You didn't. Son, that hurts, but man, go give Johnny a high five and say good job. Because he won. It's okay. And you use his motivation to be better next year. But he's happy right now. Don't tear that down. Number 2, we need to make sure they avoid laziness. I mentioned the passage earlier the context earlier lesson, First Timothy, chapter 5. And I know the context is dealing with taking care of older parents, but the principle is one that we be teaching our young men in 1 Timothy 5:8. If someone does not provide for his relatives, especially a member of his own household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. That concept needs to start being taught when our boys are very, very young. Not they have to have a job when they're 5. I'm not bringing back sweatshops. That's not what I'm talking about. But the idea of you get up and you do something. That they see that there are responsibilities. And they see that there are things to be done. And they see that we work at them because we want them to be done ultimately to the Lord, but also to serve our family, to serve other people. And God expects us to be people who actually do things. Now, there's a balance here. Is there a time for rest? Yes. Personally, I think that's one of the reasons you have the recording of that seventh day of creation where God ceased from creating and things is to fill into our mind that we're not to be workaholics and to never ever sleep or never ever even stop to eat. I think the Bible talks about that balance. But especially in the culture in which we live where many things are so easy for us, convenient for us, we can go to the other extreme so often and so easily that we begin to teach our boys it's okay, boy, to not do much at all. And to not work with excellence. And to not do the very best we can do with whatever it is that our hands find to do. That almost sounds biblical, by the way. When we can just sit on our couch and watch whatever we want to for hours and hours and hours and hours, our culture basically says that's the sign you've made it as a man. When you can just take all day, every day, and do next to nothing. Contrast that with some reminders from Proverbs. And there are a whole lot more than this, but just for time's sake, here are just a few. Proverbs 10, verse 5. He who gathers in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame. Proverbs 12, verse 11. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. Proverbs 13:4 is probably my favorite of these. The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. Proverbs 20, verse 4. The sluggard does not plow in autumn. He will seek at harvest and have nothing. And one more. Proverbs 24:30-34 contains a little story, and in the moral of the story it says, I passed by the field of a sluggard, by the vineyard of a man lacking sense, and behold, it was all overgrown with thorns. The ground was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. Then I saw and considered it. I looked and received instruction. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. You may be thinking, yeah, those are Proverbs, but they're also from the Old Testament. Is there anything in the New Testament that tells us to do the same thing? Yeah, Colossians 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, work heartily, as unto the Lord and not for men. We need to be doing our best to instill that in the young people. It's 2023, late 2023. I'm tired of everything being about COVID, okay? But that does play into this. But before that hit, and many of us, depending on our jobs, if you're a farmer or something, may not have changed much as far as your work, but if you were in office work or things like that, you probably were online more, or by a screen at least more than before, and many of that necessarily so. This study was done before that, just before that actually. It said in the Western world, not just the United States, this would be like Western Europe, Australia, United States, Canada, those places. They said the average life expectancy was 72 years, men and women combined. And if trends continued when that study was done, a person in those 72 years will spend 6 years and 8 months of them on social media. They'll spend 8 years and 4 months watching television. Now compare that with the fact that they'll spend 3.5 years eating. And it makes me wonder, are we actually a culture who works very much? Again, I'm not saying never watch television or never be on social media, but we're fighting for raising sons who are working as unto the Lord. Do they ever mow the yard at all? Or do we just do it? That's a fight we're having at our house. My son is obviously 16. He can mow the yard. Oh, it's hot. Well, guess what? It's just as hot for Dad. The temperature did not change because I became 45 years old and all of a sudden get cooler outside. So get outside and go on a lawnmower, mow the yard, and do it right. Finish it up. But while you're doing that, I'm going to be doing something too. I'm not just going to lay here, because I've got my son to do my work for me. No, there are things to do. There's work to be done, and they need to see those things. I want my son to have pleasure, to have fun, to know that's part of life too. But our culture wants our sons to be lazy, and I don't want that. God doesn't want that. Number 3, and what you probably figure we talk about for a few moments, we've got to help them work through, think through the lust of this world. Do you realize that any young man, or frankly any man, who thinks they cannot fall into sexual sin would have to be stronger than Samson, wiser than Solomon, and more godly than David? I mean, those are 3 heroic people in Scripture, and all 3 of them fell into sexual sin. Grave sexual sin, which all of it is, but you know what I mean when I say that. And in our society, which is just sexually saturated, we have to teach our sons, our young men, to guard their hearts as best as possible against lust. And that's in just their everyday life. In other words, just seeing girls and things, but also, of course, their online life. Statistics about online pornography, they're all over the map as far as the accuracy of them and the ages and different things. This is from a source that I trust, but I say that still with a grain of salt because the numbers are hard to come by. But it is estimated that by the time a young man turns 18, there's a 92.3% chance he's seen pornography of a hardcore nature. Frankly, I think that number's low. At 92.3%, I think it's low. I think it's almost 100. But anyway, whatever the number is, it's a dangerous thing. And if you think it's not that big of a deal or doesn't matter, this is not from a Christian website or Christian writer. This is actually from a secular source. This was actually, I may get in trouble on the live stream, this was actually a survey of sex therapists in the United Kingdom. So not exactly a Christian source, okay? I didn't Google it. I came across it later. But they were asked if pornography use, even in what they called in the survey, on a casual basis, harmed relationships. Now remember, these are not looking at this from a Christian perspective at all. They were asked by Cosmopolitan magazine. 86% said yes, it hurts relationships. And 90% said the more it's used, the more it hurts a relationship. These are secular people who are sex therapists in a secular culture saying it ain't good for us. It ain't good for our relationships. But it's not just pornography. I don't want to just harp on that. That's obviously kind of the big topic right now because it's so ubiquitous, it's so widespread. But sometimes because I'm trying to be very careful, I talk about this obviously, but very hardcore, very dark pornography, because that is so much a part of what we think of, we have lost sight of the fact of how just sexual our culture is across the board. We're only worried about the really, hardcore, scary stuff, difficult stuff, and we forget to really see, the old phrase, sex sells. I'm not sure it does anymore because we see it all the time. It doesn't really make any difference to us anymore as far as what we see. The fashion world has brought in so much of this. The young men have to deal with quite literally girls, not just teenagers, but girls wearing very highly sexualized clothing. Leah my wife likes to talk about, and she may be talking about this with ladies now, I don't know. When our daughter became old enough, size-wise large enough to move from what really is like junior's clothes to like teenage clothes, and the complete difference in not just cut and length of shorts and skirts and that sort of thing, but the messaging on the clothes. I mean, she legitimately had to completely stop going to a couple of stores because there was literally nothing other than like a pair of jeans that she could have bought our daughter that were Christianly in any way, shape, or form. And our daughter is tall for her age. So this happened when she was like 10 or 11. Now, for a girl, normal size, maybe like 12, 13. But think about the effect that has on boys. When they're 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and they don't even quite understand yet what they're seeing, but they're seeing girls wear things with messaging on that's just very sexual. Sometimes overtly and sometimes playfully. That's not good. TV shows, movies just filled with immodesty, crude sexual jokes. That's just the norm. A pop star just can't be a pop star unless she can not only sing, and that's questionable, but dress in a way that shows off her sexuality. Just have young men just wagging their tongues at her. And then add to that the age in which we live where so many young women are being taught to be sexually aggressive, to show I'm in control of this. You're not. No man's going to tell me what I'm going to get what I want. And now young men are being preyed upon, not just young women, but young men are being preyed upon. And of course, add to that the homosexual agenda, the transgender agenda, which tells our young men that you pursue whatever you want. Whether it's a girl, whether it's a boy, whether you want to be a girl, whatever, that you just get whatever you want. Sex or sexuality in any form is fine. You should pursue that. How do we teach our young men to fight against it? 1 Corinthians 6:18, flee from sexual morality. Flee from sexual morality. But we also put that verse back in its context to remind them that God cares about sex. God cares about the physical. God cares about all of us in that way. And we teach our sons that they're going to, in the culture in which we live, you are going to see things that are going to tempt you. That's all there is to it. You drive down the interstate and look at billboards, you're going to see something that tempts you. That's just the way it is. Surfing channels on TV, not even looking for anything bad. You're going to go by a commercial that's going to titillate, and that's just going to happen. And we teach them that when those things happen, you do what Paul talked about. You take every thought captive for Christ. You say, this is not a thought I want to hold on to. I want to think purely about either a girl I'm dating or a girl that I want to marry one day, even if I'm not dating. We teach our young men, the phrase is coming into vogue now, to bounce our eyes. In other words, I see something, and instead of continuing to look, I look the other way. Does anybody else think it's sadly ironic that the name of the store is Victoria's Secret? Because she doesn't have very many. Okay, let's just be honest. I mean, there's not a whole lot there. And you may think this is absolutely silly, stupid, a prude, whatever. But for myself, frankly, but also then to teach my son, I started doing this, and thankfully he picked up. I didn't even tell him to do it. He picked up on it. We have one of those stores in our mall in Paducah. We've lived in other places that have them as well. When we walk by them, we look at our shoes. We look straight down. And you may think, well, that's just stupid. Look, I know myself. And that may be saying way too much. But I know that if I take a glance in there, it won't be a glance. I'll figure out the secrets. And I don't want my son to see his dad doing that. I want my son to realize, you know what, I kind of feel sorry for those girls who think that's what it takes to be popular or famous or whatever. And you know what, my shoes need cleaning anyway, so it's probably a good thing. I started doing that, lived in Nashville, and our neighborhood mall was Opry Mills, which is, like the size of Cleveland. I did learn doing that, though. They don't clean the floors in front of Victoria's Secret very well. After walking by that store enough times and looking down, I was like, I need to take a different hallway. It's kind of dirty over here. It's disgusting sometimes. And I learned I need to shine my shoes. But I'm somebody who hates shining your shoes. Psalm 119, verse 9. How can a young man keep his way pure? By guarding it according to your word. By guarding it according to your word. One way we do that is by teaching our sons to look into the Word of God enough to know, obviously, what's right and wrong. That's kind of the baseline. but also to be honest. What are the things that tempt you in this area, in the area of lust, sexuality? Because we may think, well, he's just going to be tempted by, this particular type of girl. And no, I don't know. We're all different. And so I need to know what types of things he needs to not be around, not see, not be near. And then also have the Word of God in his heart in those times when he does see something or hear something that causes those thoughts. I'll say this very quickly. It's not really part of this lesson, but it needs to be said. I mentioned it last night, so I'll take just a moment here. One thing we need to avoid, and this is really hard, is only talking about sex is terrible, sex is sinful, sex is awful. We also need to teach them that within marriage it's a good thing. That's a hard balance. But they need to hear both sides of that. That as you're, before you're married, as you're growing, these are feelings you're going to have. You're going to see things that are going to cause you to, really have some decisions to make about it. Are you going to keep looking and thinking and those sorts of things? But there also is a beauty in the fact that there's hopefully, Lord willing, a young girl out there at one of these days you're going to go, she's gorgeous. Okay. Be careful with where you go with that thought. But it's okay to be attracted to someone and help them walk through those decisions. Now, I said we're going to take most of our time talking about some things to help them avoid. And that's all the negative stuff. In just the last handful of minutes here, I've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. What do we help them run to? Because see, if all I do is teach my son, avoid this and avoid this and avoid this, that's good, right? But I want to give him something to aspire to. You know what it is? It's the qualifications for elders. You read through those qualifications for elders that Paul wrote to Timothy and to Titus, and other than being married and having children, what thing on that list is not something every Christian man should be striving for? You don't have to get married to go to heaven. Okay, I get that. You don't have to have children to go to heaven. I get that. But everything else, literally, everything else in those qualifications for elders are things that every Christian man should be striving to have and to be and to think and the way they should live. Not a drunkard. Was that just for elders? No, the New Testament kind of talks about it. Somebody who can control their temper. That's not just for elders. That's for all of us, right? And so we give our sons a view of, look, if you never get married or God never blesses you with children, that's okay. I mean, I'd like for you to get married and have children one day, but that's what I'd like for you. That may not be what you want. That may not be what God has in plan for you. I don't know. Okay? But whether you do or not, as far as that goes, son, the other things here, you're going to bless the world. You're going to bless a church. You're going to bless people's lives. And you're going to be pure and holy before God because you have those types of qualities in your life. There's a book that Glenn Colley wrote, actually for Lads to Leaders a number of years ago. The name of the book is called Headed to the Office. And he wrote it, again, for Lads to Leaders, but it could be used for family devotionals or a Bible class. In fact, it's a Bible class book, really. It's like 13 chapters. The whole point of the book is that he takes young men through the qualifications for elders and basically says, this is what you should be doing as a young man anyway. And kind of in each chapter, or most of the chapters, he then has some questions or discussion parts where he basically says, okay, when you grow up and you are whatever, an elder, a husband, a father, whatever, how would you show this in your life? Self-control, for example. Or dealing with controlling your tongue, or dealing with alcohol, or whatever situation, whatever the qualification is. It's a wonderful resource. And even if you don't use that particular resource as far as teaching your son, the concept is brilliant. Because it reminds our sons that, yes, I want you to avoid these things that the world is trying to, undergird, trying to say that's just dumb. Look, you just care about you. You just get whatever you want. You just eat, drink, and be merry. Take thine ease. That should be your life. You look at whatever you want to look at. You have sex with everyone. You just do whatever you want to do. It's all about you. I can fight against that all day long. But if I don't give my son something to reach for, I'm falling short. I want them to see, I want him to see, I want all of our young men, but my son specifically, to see that it's not just avoiding bad stuff that matters. I want him to see there's something to stretch for. He may never become an elder. That's beside the point. But I want all of our young men to be stretching for something that God has set up. And if I may say this in a respectful way, has basically said, this is my kind of man. We raise sons who have those qualities. If they get married, their wife is blessed. If they have children one day of their own, those kids will be stronger. Where they worship, whether it's here or maybe they move off, maybe the military and they live around the world several different places, those churches will be stronger. Whatever community they live in will be stronger. Whatever nation they live in will be stronger. But if all we do is have them run away from bad stuff, we've helped. But when we give them something to strive for, we've changed this world. And that's what God wants us to do. God wants us to change this world. Our sons are the ones who can do it. We have to believe in them enough to show them you can do this. No matter how dark this world might get, you can change it if you're God's man. I hope that's encouraged you. I love having a son. He's very, very different from me. Very different from me. But I see in him potential to be someone who can make a tremendous difference. And I love that. I love that he's not just like me because the world only needs one of me. I love that he's not like me because it shows that God uses very, very different people to do things. But I really want him to see the potential in him. And whether he becomes whatever. He's talked about being everything from working at PetSmart to Apologetics Press. And I'm thinking, maybe there's a middle ground in here somewhere between selling dogs to people and researching the eye. There's got to be some middle ground somewhere. Whatever he does for a living, I've told him over and over and over again, if you're faithful to God, that's all I care about. That's all I care about. Because that's how you get to heaven, and that's how you change the world. What's our plan? We're waiting for the ladies to be done, or force them to be done? Sure. We can do it over there. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Mm-hmm. We're flexible. Okay. The most common answer will be, I don't know, but we'll be glad to do that. No, just kidding. We'll be glad to do it. Yeah, for for sure. All right. Okay. Let's go over and make the ladies. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you all for your attention. Or